So the other day, I was hanging out with a friend of mine who is also into poetry. We were talking about poetry, and he told me, well, first he recited the poem Ozymandias, and then he proceeded to tell me a little bit about the backstory of it. And I had not been familiar with this backstory beforehand, but once he told me, I found it so fascinating that I felt like I had to share it with you guys. So, Ozymandias was written by Percy Shelley in 1817. It was actually written about an Egyptian pharaoh, Ramses II. And so I looked up the information so I could get some exact facts about this before I talk to you guys about it. But I'm going to talk about this poem, the poem by Percy Shelley, as well as another poem by Horace Smith, who, a friend of Percy Shelley, is not as well known. Percy Shelley is the more well-known poet, also partly because he was married to Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein. So the two of them, poets, writers, bit of a strong couple in terms of, classical prose and poetry, but so Ozymandias was an alternative name for Ramses, as I mentioned, and Percy Shelley began writing this poem in 1817 after the announcement that the British Museum had acquired a fragment of a statue of Ramses II from the 13th century BCE. And it's, of course, obvious that he was, inspired by this. And the fragment was 7.25 tons, and it consisted of the statue's head and torso, recovered from the mortuary temple of Ramses at Thebes by an Italian adventurer. And so they, discovered this and arrived in London a few years later. And Shelley wrote this poem in a sort of friendly competition with Horace Smith, who was also a poet, although mostly, friend and lesser-known poet, I guess. And they both wrote poems on the topic. And Percy Shelley's poem was published in this magazine, The Examiner, and Horace Smith's poem was also published in The Examiner a month later. So I think that might also be why Percy Shelley's version is more famous. So I'm going to read Percy Shelley's poem first, Ozymandias, and then I'm going to read Horace Smith's poem. So this is Percy Shelley's. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand half sunk a shattered visage lies, whose frowned and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions red which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed, and on the pedestal these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away." So, Horace Smith's poem was also previously titled Ozymandias, although in later collections he retitled it on a stupendous leg of granite discovered standing by itself in the deserts of Egypt with the inscription inserted below. Which, I mean, a lot of those classical poets like those long-winded names, so I think it's pretty clever. But here's Smith's poem. In Egypt's sandy silence, all alone, stands a gigantic leg, which far off throws the only shadow that the desert knows. I am great Ozymandias, saith the stone. King of kings, this mighty city shows. The wonders of my hand, the city's gone, not but the leg remaining to disclose the sight of this forgotten Babylon. We wonder, and some hunter may express wonder like ours, when through the wilderness where London stood, holding the wolf in chance, he meets some fragment huge and stops to guess what powerful but unrecorded race once dwelt in that annihilated place. So, Horace Smith's poem is a little bit darker and more obvious, but they both sort of explore the fate of history and time, and how all the prominent men and empires and things, I guess, are not permanent, and how legacies will fade eventually. And they, contrast this to the ruins that are still there. They still dug up this statue of Ramses, and I find it interesting because the fragment of the statue that they had found was the head and torso. So they both think about what it must be like out there, the bits that have not been dug up yet, the leftover hunks of stone of the legs and whatever it was that it was supported by. So yeah, that's pretty interestingly haunting. And Horace Smith, of course, at the end talks about London and how, where they were, but talking about almost a post-apocalyptic future. Maybe not post-apocalyptic, but in the future, how people may find the ruins of London, and wonder what life was once like, which is pretty interesting. Now that I, think of a post-apocalypse, it makes me wonder what those ancient civilizations would think, whether they would consider modern day almost a post-apocalypse for their people, Anyway, that was Ozymandias and Horace Smith's poem formerly known as Ozymandias, currently known as On a Stupendous Leg of Granite Discovered Standing by Itself in the Deserts of Egypt with the Inscription inserted below. Title. But anyway, that's just a bit about the backstory of that poem, or those two poems, I guess. I had some trouble finding a generator that sort of went with the theme of the whole, desert Egyptian thing for the background. So what I ended up finding was a sort of dungeon generator, which sounds like footsteps walking through a tomb with, the crackling torch and bits of dripping water off of things and the dust and the echoes, and very reminiscent of Indiana Jones, I think, or, the generator itself advertises itself as useful for Dungeons and Dragons, but I just thought of what it must be like to, explore the ancient Egyptian tombs. Anyway, that is it for today, and I will see you guys next time.